Tears of the Kingdom is worse than Breath of the Wild. Is this controversial? I started writing the script about a month after the game came out, and it was probably quite contentious at the time, but it really shouldn't be. I mean, the most beloved thing about Breath of the Wild is how dense and detailed the world is, and the worst thing about Breath of the Wild is how it constantly interrupts you. Tears of the Kingdom addresses these issues by being twice as big, with half the contents and triple the interruptions. This is a really simple and direct way of proving that Tears of the Kingdom is a worse game. The only problem is that everyone already knows this. In the years it took me to complete this script, the discussion over Tears of the Kingdom's numerous failures has progressed to the argumentative equivalent of universal heat death. But to be honest, I don't think anyone has actually touched upon the core reason as to why this game is less fun. Tears of the Kingdom has a lot of really obvious flaws, but the things that actually ruin the overall experience are more insidious because they're problems on the structural level. To put it simply, Tears of the Kingdom does not understand why Breath of the Wild is fun. This point can be proven by examining the 3 flashy new toys presented to the player. These 3 new mechanics are the main concept which separate Tears of the Kingdom from its older sister. There's Fuse, which lets you create your own custom weapons, Ultra Hand lets you create your own custom vehicles, and Recall, which lets you rewind time. None of these tools seem particularly harmful on the surface, but in combination they give the player a secret 4th ability. They give you the power to optimize the fun out of the game. Perhaps the biggest dumb human behavior is that we tend to value efficiency over all else. We will follow the path of least resistance as it beckons us into the grave. For a game designer, what this means is that it doesn't matter how fun your game is. If the best parts of your game aren't efficient, then those parts will be ignored. Players will always optimize the fun out of a game. The obvious example of this is in Elden Ring, where players will go to great lengths in order to find the most overpowered items and trivialize every single boss. When you examine this behavior through the lens of fun, it doesn't make any sense. Elden Ring's gameplay is centered around how fulfilling it is to overcome a great challenge, but items like Mimic Tear just remove the challenge. You're going out of your own way to avoid the gameplay of the very game you've chosen to buy and play, which doesn't make any sense. But what people on both sides misunderstand about this behavior is that it has nothing to do with fun, it's just about efficiency. Whatever part of our brains is concerned with completing goals doesn't really understand the concept of happiness. So if you present it with a choice between spending 3 hours learning to fight a difficult boss or 3 minutes trivializing that boss with an overpowered item, it's just going to follow the path of least resistance, which is a shame because that very resistance is the whole point of the game. Now, in Elden Ring's case, this optimization issue doesn't actually cause a problem since it's impossible to have any fun there anyway, but there are countless games that actually do suffer from this optimization allowance. The solution to over-efficiency is rather simple though. All you have to do is ensure that the funnest thing that the player can do is also the most optimal thing. In a linear game, this is done automatically. The funnest path to victory is the same as the optimal path to victory because there's only one path. But the more freedom you give to the player, the harder it is to stop them from ruining their own fun. It's truly fortunate that the contemporary gaming zeitgeist isn't obsessed with player freedom for seemingly no reason or gain. Breath of the Wild is a product of the contemporary gaming zeitgeist that's obsessed with player freedom for seemingly no reason or gain. But what people get wrong about Breath of the Wild is that the freedom is not the point of the game. It might be a general thematic goal, but the memorable touchstones of freedom are pretty disconnected from the moment-to-moment gameplay that actually kept you playing the game for 100 hours. The occasional cool discovery does not a gameplay loop make. So, why is Breath of the Wild so addictive? What is it that makes this game tick? It's the structure. Breath of the Wild is split into 3 diverse phases of play. There's exploration, puzzle solving, and combat. Each of these 3 are kind of interesting on their own, but the contrast between the 3 is the fundamental reason why the game is fun. Like, say you're exploring in Breath of the Wild and you just get bored of it eventually, bound to happen. Rather than, not playing anymore, you could just go do something else. You could start fighting. Now, eventually you'll get bored of fighting too. It's not like Breath of the Wild has the deepest combat in any game, but then you could just go solve puzzles. And by the time you get bored of solving puzzles, well, you'll probably be refreshed enough that you can enjoy exploring again. It's the constant fluctuation between these three distinct modes of play that makes each individually much more interesting, and it keeps the entire experience feeling fresh for much longer than it has any right to. This is the core of Breath of the Wild. This is the apple in the apple pie. The world is expansive and memorable, sure, but it really only exists to facilitate this simple gameplay loop. The cycle between exploration, combat, and puzzle solving is what actually keeps you playing. But the thing is, it's delicate. If even a single one of them was disrupted, the whole game would fall apart. Fortunately for me, Tears of the Kingdom ruins all three. Breath of the Wild's combat is neat. You swing the sword breaks. Attacking with weapons is a simple yet powerful strategy in combat, but good weapons are rare and break quickly, making them a limited resource. It's not hard to deplete your entire stock of weaponry in a single combat, meaning that the only tools you have left to defeat the enemy in front of you is the vast creativity with which the game allows. The fundamental mechanics of Breath of the Wild are intricate, and they allow for the player to come up with deeply personal solutions to any problem they encounter. This is incredibly fun. The only small issue with it is that creativity is less efficient than swordplay. But when all your swords have shattered to the wind, the only choice you have left is to explore the depths of your psyche and get creative. The fact that the weapons break stops you from over-optimizing and forces you to have fun. The reason that this works is because weapons are a scarce resource. If you wish to vanquish your foes in the simplest manner, you have to pay a considerable chronal cost for the privilege, which makes it significantly less efficient. Now, Tears of the Kingdom takes this fragile system of fragile swords and adds fuse to the mix. What fuse allows you to do is attach monster parts to your weapons in order to increase their damage. Weapons themselves, especially powerful weapons, are still pretty rare, but monster parts drop from every enemy you kill. And these monster parts give a huge boost to damage. Even common ones are so potent that they can turn any item, even say a mob, into an efficient tool of death, which is a problem. The fuse system makes it so that powerful weapons are common. There's never any shortage of ammunition, and thus you never have any reason to interact with the numerous other methods of combat the game provides. You just defeat every single enemy in melee, which was never designed to be the only method of fighting, and thus the combat quickly becomes stale and repetitive. Now, this does eventually happen in Breath of the Wild as well. At some point you'll hoard enough cash to buy a functionally endless stock of arrows, and combat loses all tension and interest as you snipe every opponent from 100 meters away. This is essentially the exact same problem Tears of the Kingdom has, but it's not nearly as severe in Breath of the Wild. Money is hard to come by, and arrows are expensive. You only really get rich enough to deploy this strategy after you've already beaten the game. In Tears of the Kingdom, monster parts are abundant. You immediately amass far more than you could ever reasonably use, and so combat is ruined from the very beginning. This problem of easy weapons also cascades and makes exploration less meaningful. In Breath of the Wild, one of the main incentives to explore is to find powerful weapons so that you can defeat stronger enemies. You explore in order to gather the resources needed to fuel combat, and then fighting spends those resources, which gives you a reason to explore and refuel. It's a simple, effective gameplay loop. But in Tears of the Kingdom, weapons don't matter, monster parts do. And you don't get monster parts by exploring, you get monster parts by fighting. You fight in order to fight, and then you fight to fight some more, and fight to fight, and then you get bored of fighting and you stop playing the game. In summary, the fact that powerful weapons are so common allows you to ruin your own experience as you kill every enemy with the same strategy and optimize the fun out of the game. Ultra Hand lets you pick up stuff and stick stuff together. One of its main uses is for constructing vehicles to help you traverse the world. Most of the Ultra Hand parts are specifically tailored to movement. There's wheels, gliders, propellers, rocket boosters, and so on. With this many different parts to play with, you're given an absurd wealth of freedom. You can pretty much create any vehicle that you can imagine. But what this means in practice is that you will only create one, the hoverbike. The hoverbike is cheaper than anything else, it is faster than anything else, it is easier to build than anything else, it is more fuel efficient than anything else, and it's simple enough that you can discover it organically without looking up a guide or anything. And it flies. Theoretically, it might be fun to design your own personalized vehicle, but in practice all it will do is waste your time and resources. The hoverbike is more optimal, so the hoverbike is the only thing you're ever going to make. But that's not a huge deal, that's just Ultra Hand ruining itself. The more important problem is that any flying contraption you create with Ultra Hand will be so powerful that it trivializes any form of exploration. You can, at almost no cost, soar above and around every obstacle, which completely obliterates any type of atmosphere, ambience, immersion, or stakes. Of course, you could simply choose not to fly over everything, but that would mean you'd have to walk about everywhere. Do you see what I mean by optimizing the fun out of the game? However, traversal is not the only use of Ultra Hand. The big fun part of it is that almost every puzzle in the game is designed exclusively around its use. And these short puzzle segments give you a limited amount of resources, meaning that you cannot create the most optimal tools, which forces you into using Ultra Hand creatively. At least it would. But of course, this fun method of play is far from optimal, thanks to... In the original Breath of the Wild, puzzles are perhaps the most important pillar of the main gameplay loop. This is because both combat and exploration are fairly high tempo and high energy. They're both kind of go go go, and they're willing to let you set the pace as quickly as you would like. Puzzles provide a blunt contrast to this. Even the simplest ones are slow and methodical. They make the player stop, fully stop, and think. Now, the actual puzzles themselves are not really that interesting. They feel like they were designed for children. But the puzzles as a whole are still vital to the game due to the change of pace they provide. That's why the puzzle shrines are scattered all across the map. They exist to break up long stretches of exploration and slow the player down. But that's only in Breath of the Wild, because Tears of the Kingdom does not have puzzles. Tears of the Kingdom has recall. The recall ability allows you to choose an object and send it back in time. This ability seems pretty innocent on the surface, which I suppose is how it was overlooked in development, because recall is so versatile that you can use it to effortlessly circumvent every obstacle in the game. The biggest limitation of Ultra Hand is that while you can use it to pick up and move objects, you can't use it to move an object that you are standing on, because this would essentially grant you infinite flight. However, what you can do is you can use Ultra Hand to pick up an object and drop it, then stand on the fallen object and cast Recall, causing you to fly in the air. Suddenly we've reinvented infinite flight, and while it may be a slow and tedious infinite flight, it's an infinite flight that allows all puzzles to be fully ignored by any player with the staggering mental capacity required to use two different tools at the same time. So, puzzles turn from a unique test of creativity into a routine. You go in, you move a thing with Ultra Hand, you recall it, and then you get the privilege of watching the 5-minute cutscene in order to leave the shrine. Now, losing the puzzles themselves doesn't really matter. They're still witheringly oversimplified and provide no real intrigue to anyone over the age of 9. But the big loss is the change of pace they provide. A player that isn't doing puzzles is a player that is only exploring and fighting, and is a player that is getting tired of exploring and fighting even faster than they would be otherwise. This puzzle tempo effect is the most insidious problem of the three I've discussed, so you might not relate to it personally, but in my mind it is the most egregious way in which we are allowed to optimize the fun out of the game. The basics are not the basics because they're the easiest. You learn them first because they are the most important, and you can't do anything else without them. Tears of the Kingdom does not practice the basics. It allows the player to optimize the fun out of their own game. This pitiful negligence ruins all 3 pillars of Breath of the Wild's core gameplay loop, turning a game that barely functions into one that doesn't work at all. But Breath of the Wild was made anyway, so who cares?